He absolutely is not predicting that the 2022 elections would be illegitimate. The point he was raising was both that in 2020, even amongst challenging circumstances, efforts to suppress the vote, and the midst of a pandemic, there was record turnout. Democrats and Republicans, record turnout to go to the polls. He was not making a prediction. He has confidence in the American people, and we're going to do everything we can to protect people's rights.
She didn't touch that race part. In focus now, Republican Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas, a member of the Senate Judiciary and Armed Services Committees. Good to have you in focus today. First of all, what's your reaction, or what was your reaction initially hearing the president say, oh no, I didn't say that?
Well, Harris, he can get angry and shout and shake his fist at the clouds like Grandpa Simpson as much as he wants. But he said what he said in Atlanta a couple of weeks ago, and it's now widely recognized even by Democrats that it was beyond the pale and that it alienated the senators whose votes he needed, to include Democratic senators who he compared to those segregationists and secessionists, who I would point out are all Democrats, by the way. So no amount of spin is going to change what he said, just like no amount of spin from his underlings today will change the fact that he, in effect, gave Vladimir Putin a green light to invade Ukraine. We saw yesterday why the president's staff generally doesn't let him go out and meet the press.
Well, look, I mean, he looked up there at his watch and he kind of looked back. He made the decision to stay there, and then he threw his press people under the bus and said, oh, thanks a lot for helping me out up here. Wow, those are some really interesting moments behind, when they were trying to clean up on aisle 7 about what you're talking about. Let's get into it. Critics have torn into the president's comments, and they were rather bizarre on Russia as he went on and on and on about an imminent invasion by the Russians into Ukraine. Let's watch a bit.
I think what you're going to see is that Russia will be held accountable if it invades, and it depends on what it does. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion and then we end up having a fight about what to do and not do, et cetera. My guess is he will move in. He has to do something.
Well, like I said, I mean, it was hard during the press conference to even hear the rest of what he had to say because you're just kind of unpacking that. His critics were quick. They were pouncing on the shift, arguing the president just gave Russia a green light to invade and that no incursion is permissible, or impermissible, I should say, forgive me. Even Ukraine President Zelensky weighed in, tweeting earlier today, there are no minor incursions in small nations, just as there are no minor casualties and little grief from the loss of loved ones. Eventually, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki clarified the president's comments last hour on America's Newsroom.
The president has conveyed directly to President Putin, if there is the movement of any military troops across the border, that is an invasion. If they go in, that is an invasion, and there will be severe economic consequences.
Look, Senator, she said it. The president didn't say that, though, and it wasn't like he misspoke. He really dissected exactly what he was anticipating and what we should brace for. What do you say about that?
Well, he did, and he spoke at greater length about Ukraine as well. What really matters is not what his underlings claim he said or what his cheerleaders in the Democratic media heard. What matters is what the Ukrainian president heard, and we just heard from him, and most importantly, what Vladimir Putin heard. And what Vladimir Putin heard is that he has a green light to invade Ukraine. And remember, these troops, more than 100,000 Russian troops and sailors, didn't just show up on Ukraine's border in a vacuum. This is happening in the aftermath of the catastrophic weakness and haplessness that President Biden displayed last August, getting our own people out of Afghanistan. Vladimir Putin saw that, and he saw how President Biden has appeased him for the last year, and he's concluded that now is the time to go for the jugular in Ukraine, because Joe Biden cannot lead a unified and strong response from the United States and our European allies.
He couldn't even make it clear what a red line is. Like, we're always looking for that. Well, what's the tipping point of getting us, to lean in with those epic-sized sanctions that he's talking about? And what exactly is a minor incursion? I mean, now we're left to watch the people who would be invaded to tell us on Twitter how they feel as targets right now. I mean, it's heartbreaking. And I would say, based on what you just said, really, really bad policy going forward. I want to get to this. Vice President Kamala Harris this morning snapped back when asked to clarify Biden's remarks on Russia and Ukraine.
I will tell you that the president has been very clear, and we as the United States are very clear. If Putin takes aggressive action, we are prepared to levy serious and severe costs.
It is less than clear because 30 minutes after the news conference, the White House press secretary had to actually clarify the president's remarks.
Savannah, I'm being clear with you right now.
Yes, okay.
And so if you're interested, I'll continue to be clear.
So they're angry and they're combative, and I don't know if that's as effective as original messaging.
No, well, again, the vice president and the press secretary and all the other White House underlings can go on every TV show they want today. That doesn't change the fact that Joe Biden yesterday got in some kind of academic philosophical debate about what level of invasion into Ukraine might cause a Western response, into some kind of academic debate about why Vladimir Putin is doing what he's doing. He's doing it because Joe Biden is weak and impotent and he thinks he can take advantage of him. The last time we had a Democratic president, Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine as well. But, you know, for 4 years of Republican president and former President Trump, Vladimir Putin didn't invade Ukraine. Why do we think that is, despite the Democrats yelling Russia, Russia, Russia for 4 years? It's because Putin understood that Donald Trump, like Republicans, are strong, and we stand by our allies and partners around the world.
You know, it's interesting. I don't think we've talked this much about Russia since that time, right? And it was all over the place as they went after Trump and so on and so forth. But now all eyes are on this president. And what is at the center of it today? Russia. What does Russia think? Real quickly, give me 10 seconds.
Russia thinks that Joe Biden is willing to stand idly by and slap the mildest of sanctions on them if they invade and occupy and annex Ukraine.